So I'm going to quickly talk about command line arguments. This example is mainly to give you an idea of how to utilize them in Eclipse and in the command line, as well as jar files and how we make them. We're going to go ahead and use the example from assignment 3, which is your command line arguments are expected to be an optional -c followed by the number representing which player the computer should be. So your main method takes your string array of command line arguments. You can take a look at any of them by just doing a simple printout. So I could do something like printout arg0, printout args1. And to make it more clear, I can say argument 0, argument 1. And the way I utilize this in Eclipse is by going to my run profiles. So when you actually go to run as or debug as, right click on your main class here, you'll see there's actually a configuration. So instead of just running it as a Java application, you can create a configuration for the run. And if you create a configuration, it's going to actually require you to name it. It's going to require you to give information about your command line arguments and things like along those lines. So we can create a new launch configuration here. It'll automatically default to using project demo in the main class example. So I just clicked on this new launch configuration button. And this is good enough for running the program using the main class example and the project demo, which is what I am using here. But we can also go into arguments and give VM and program arguments. So the program arguments is what's actually getting read by your main method here. We can add the arguments -c and 1, for example, and do an apply. And then I can press the run button and it will run the program, and you can see in my console that it did pass in those arguments. And then in the future, when I want to run it, I can right click, go to run as, run configurations, and do that again. Or I can actually just click up here and it remembers the last run configurations used, including that example one. Okay, so this is how we do it in Eclipse. If you want to do it via command line, you can go ahead and open your command prompt here. First thing you want to do is navigate to the directory that Eclipse has stored this information, which is your workspace. So my workspace, for example, is on my D drive, and it's in my coding folder, and then my Java workspace. Sorry, my Java folder. If I do a directory, I see several things there, including my demo project. Now in my demo directory, you see I did a dir to list everything there. You see there is a bin and a source. So source contains all your Java files. Bin contains your binary files, which is going to include your .class file. So every Java program gets a .class file for every .java file. You're going to want to find the one that corresponds to your main class. So example is my main class, so example.class is the one that I want. And you can simply run it by typing Java example. And when you just type Java example, it runs it with no arguments. So I'm going to put my arguments out here and be like -c1. I could also say argument and another argument. And these are my two arguments. Note, if I were to do this on accident in my Java folder, in my source folder, I would get a example.java, but I can't run that. So if I try to do this, it's going to give me an error saying it can't load this class because it can't load Java files. It has to load .class files, which are the compiled versions. Okay, so this is how you run it from the command line to begin with. Now this assignment has to be turned in using jar files. A jar file, JAR, is a Java archive, and that's basically just like a .rar, a normal zip file, a tarball, or whatever you're used to, except it's meant for Java files, so Java archive. In Eclipse, it's really easy to generate those. You can just right-click on your project, so mine here is demo, and go to export. When you click on export, it'll ask you how. Jar file is normally the default right here, so just click jar file, and click next in the wizard. And then it's going to ask you what you want to archive, so you can normally just leave this the same. Your main choices here are, do you want to export, for example, the source files, which is this checkbox. Maybe you don't want to export the source files, you just want to do this first one, which is generate the class files. Then it's going to ask you what to export it as, so you give it a path and a name. So for example, I can name mine demo.jar. And then you can just click finish, or more likely you want to go to the next panel twice, so 2 next, and it'll ask you what you want your main class to be. So for us, the main class was example, so I can click browse and set that as my main class. Okay. So once I've done that, I've made sure basically to export the class files, and on this last page I've made sure to make my main class example. You can just click finish. It'll tell you if something already exists, overwrite, yes, and it'll write that jar file to wherever you wrote it. So if I go back to my desktop, which is located on my C drive, I now actually have my jar file, and I can see that. I've actually got a couple. Demo.jar is the one we just made. I can run that by using java -jar demo.jar. And that's going to tell the Java runtime environment that I want to look at this Java archive for all of my classes. Since we specified a main class, I don't even have to tell it the main class is example. I can just go ahead and give it my arguments, A and B. Or I can give it my arguments, foo and bar. And you're going to submit assignment 2 in this way by archiving your classes, export them through Eclipse as a Java archive. And then once you've done that, you can run your program something along the lines of tic-tac-toe.jar, and then if you want, you can add -C1. And this is how I expect it to work. So I typically expect you to use the run configurations when you're testing your program, so you can get to that stuff from many different locations. Make sure your arguments are set right. And then as a couple of final tests, maybe use the command prompts in the bin folder and definitely export it as a jar before you submit it. And what I want you to submit is simply that jar file. So all you will put on Blackboard is demo.jar, or rather tic-tac-toe.jar for you. You would not send me the class files or the Java files. However, there is a caveat. I want you to include your source files. So that means when you export your Java archive file, you do want to have this box checked. I want your source files to be in your jar. Thank you.